When we think about extinction, we picture dinosaurs, dodos, dramatic endings that make headlines and fill museum halls. But right now, something quieter is happening. In your backyard soil, in the stream you pass on your morning commute, in the meadow at the edge of your town. Small creatures that hold ecosystems together are vanishing, not in headline-grabbing events, but in silent, localized disappearances too subtle to register on global scales. Here's the thing though, this isn't a story about inevitable doom, it's a story about a crisis we're finally learning to see, and one that communities around the world are already addressing with remarkable success. The research is clear about the scale of the challenge, but it's equally clear about what works, so let's explore both. Scientists call this phenomenon micro-extinction, the erosion of animal populations and local disappearances that happen before species vanish entirely from the planet. Think of it like this: a species doesn't need to go extinct for an ecosystem to collapse. You just need enough individuals to disappear from enough places for the whole system to start unraveling. The WWF Living Planet Index, one of the most comprehensive wildlife tracking systems we have, documents a 73% average decline in monitored wildlife populations since 1970. For freshwater species, that number jumps to 85%. Now, those numbers are sobering, there's no getting around that, but here's what they don't tell you. Where conservation happens, it works. Mountain gorillas in the Virunga Mountains have increased by roughly 3% every single year between 2010 and 2016, thanks to coordinated protection efforts across multiple countries. European bison went from functionally 0 individuals to 6,800 between 1970 and 2020 through dedicated reintroduction programs. The same Living Planet report that documents the declines also documents recoveries, proof that the trend line isn't fixed. It's not some inevitable slide. We actually have the power to change it. To understand why these disappearances matter so much, we need to talk about something called planetary boundaries. In 2009, a team of researchers at the Stockholm Resilience Center identified 9 biophysical processes that regulate Earth's stability. Think of them as guardrails for a healthy planet, the conditions under which human societies have flourished for thousands of years. As of the most recent update, we've crossed 7 of those 9 boundaries. Now that sounds alarming, and honestly, it should get our attention. These aren't arbitrary lines on a chart, they represent real thresholds, real tipping points. But here's the reframe I want to offer. Those boundaries aren't walls, they're a map. They show us exactly where to focus our efforts, and more importantly, staying within them is entirely possible. Biosphere integrity, the health of living systems, is one of the most pressured boundaries. Scientists measure it in 2 ways. First, genetic diversity. Current extinction rates significantly exceed what we'd expect naturally, but that also means targeted conservation can make measurable impact. Every species we protect changes the math. Second, something called HNPP, human appropriation of net primary production. Basically, how much of Earth's plant growth we're capturing for human use. Right now, we're using about 30% versus a sustainable level of less than 10%. The good news? We know exactly which land use changes can shift this balance. It's not a mystery. We have the playbook. Let me tell you about what's happening with insects, because this is where the story gets both sobering and surprisingly hopeful. A groundbreaking study from German protected areas, the Krefeld study, documented a 76% decline in flying insect biomass over 27 years. 76%. That's not a small number. And here's the thing about insects, they're not glamorous. They don't get the conservation dollars that pandas and elephants get, but they're essential. They pollinate our crops. They break down dead matter. They feed the birds and fish we do care about. But Germany's response to that study shows what's possible when we actually pay attention. Following those findings, Germany's Environment Ministry launched what they call the Action Program for Insect Protection. They started promoting insect habitats in agricultural landscapes and reducing pesticide use. The Netherlands implemented similar programs. Public awareness, that whole insect apocalypse conversation, translated directly into policy action. And what we're seeing on the ground is encouraging. Organic farming practices that eliminate pesticides show significant pollinator recovery. Wildflower margins along agricultural fields create habitat corridors, and urban pollinator gardens are spreading across cities worldwide. Farms within just 1 kilometer of diversified polyculture systems experience 20 to 30% higher pollination rates. The insect story isn't just about decline, it's about how fast ecosystems can recover when we give them the chance. Now, here's something the research makes crystal clear that I think doesn't get talked about enough. Cascade effects work both ways. When biodiversity declines in one area, those effects ripple across connected systems. But the same is true in reverse. When biodiversity improves, positive effects cascade outward. Let me give you an example. When wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone after being absent for decades, they triggered what ecologists call a trophic cascade. The wolves kept elk populations in check, which allowed willows and aspens to regenerate, which brought beavers back, which built dams that stabilized riverbanks and improved water quality. Or, take pollination. About 35% of global food production depends on animal pollinators. That actually encompasses 87 major food crops. The economic value? Well, it's somewhere between $235 and $577 billion annually. When pollinator populations recover, agricultural productivity improves. That in turn reduces pressure to convert more land to farming, which, protects more pollinator habitat. It's really a positive reinforcing loop. Soil tells a similar story. Soils contain between 25 and 33% of all living organisms on Earth and store massive amounts of carbon. Research shows that high-diversity ecosystem restoration increases carbon sequestration rates by 200% compared to just letting nature take its course, and 70% compared to monocultures. Healing soil heals climate, and, that's another positive cascade. I want to be honest with you about the hard cases. Warm water coral reefs are under severe pressure. The Global Tipping Points Report 2025 identifies them as Earth's first ecosystem approaching a climate tipping point. Since January 2023, 84% of global reefs have experienced bleaching. That's actually the most extensive event ever recorded. This is serious. At 1.5 degrees of warming, extensive reef systems face a very high probability of fundamental change. Coral reefs support roughly 1/4 of all marine species and provide food and income for about 1 billion people. But reef scientists aren't giving up, and honestly, neither should we. Coral restoration projects are scaling up globally. Marine protected areas with strict enforcement, well, they show reef recovery even after bleaching events. Researchers are identifying heat-tolerant coral strains that can seed future reefs, and reducing local stressors, like overfishing, pollution, and runoff, significantly improves reef resilience to thermal stress. The Amazon rainforest faces similar pressure, already 17% deforested with additional degradation, but Brazil's deforestation rates dropped dramatically under previous enforcement regimes, proving that policy choices matter. Indigenous managed areas consistently show better forest health than surrounding regions. These ecosystems need urgent action, but urgent and hopeless are not the same thing. Here's something else that doesn't get enough attention. The economics are actually on our side. An estimated $44 trillion of economic value generation, over half of world GDP, depends on healthy ecosystems. That's not environmentalist rhetoric. That's mainstream economic analysis. Pollination services alone contribute between $235 and $577 billion annually to global agriculture. Natural pest control, nutrient cycling, carbon storage, they all provide economic value that just disappears when ecosystems degrade. The World Bank projects, potential GDP losses of about $2.7 trillion annually by the year 2030, just from the decline of 3 ecosystem services: pollination, fisheries, and timber. But hey, if we flip that around, every dollar spent on ecosystem restoration actually generates somewhere between $9 and $30 in economic benefits. Protected areas, well, they create tourism revenue, support fisheries, reduce disaster costs, and help maintain agricultural productivity. This isn't charity, it's smart economics. And, increasingly, the financial sector is recognizing biodiversity risk as material to long-term returns. The good news is we're not starting from scratch on the policy side either. In December 2022, world governments adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's often called the Paris Agreement for Nature. Its 23 targets for 2030 include the landmark 30 by 30 commitment, protecting 30% of terrestrial and marine areas by the end of the decade. This isn't just aspirational, it's happening. Current protection stands at about 17% terrestrial and 8 to 10% marine. Yes, we need to scale up. But protected areas prove 33% more effective in reducing habitat loss compared to unprotected areas. Larger and stricter protections show even better outcomes. And community conservation is delivering results. Over 80% of community-based conservation projects show positive human well-being or environmental outcomes. Community and indigenous managed lands contain 40% of intact natural ecosystems globally. You know, forest areas that are under effective community management actually show better protection than those managed with top-down approaches. New Zealand's predator-free initiative, for example, increased kiwi hatching rates from just 5 to 10% all the way up to 50 to 60%. And over in the UK, the Thames River achieved an 80% phosphorus reduction through targeted intervention, which restored diverse fish and bird populations that had been absent for decades. So, these aren't just feel-good stories, they're actually proof of concept. They're the blueprints we can follow and, yeah, scale up. So here's where we land. The research tells us three things clearly. First, we can see the problem now. Micro-extinctions, population declines, functional losses, cryptic disappearances were invisible for way too long. The Living Planet Index, the IPBES assessments, the Planetary Boundaries Framework, they've really made the invisible visible, and that's always the first step towards solving any problem. Second, we know what works: protected areas, community-based conservation, indigenous land management, restoration ecology, pollinator-friendly farming, reduced pollution. These aren't just theoretical, they're proven interventions delivering measurable results in communities all around the world. Third, the economic support action. Every single dollar in ecosystem protection returns $9 to $30 in benefits. The cost of inaction totally dwarfs the cost of action. This isn't sacrifice, it's investment. The question isn't whether we can address micro-extinctions. We can. The question is whether we'll scale what works fast enough to matter. And that's where you come in. The communities protecting mountain gorillas, the farmers planting pollinator corridors, the cities creating urban wildlife habitat, the indigenous groups managing forests. They're not waiting for someone else to act. They're showing us what's possible when we take the research seriously and respond with care. The extinctions nobody's counting are exactly the ones we have the power to prevent. The boundaries aren't walls, they're guidelines, and within those guidelines, there's room for a thriving planet and thriving communities. We just have to choose to build it. If this kind of research-driven, solutions-focused content is what you're looking for, subscribe to the channel. We dig into the data, both the challenges and what's actually working, so you can understand the state of the world and find your place in creating a thriving future for all. What gives you hope when you think about biodiversity? Drop a comment below. I'd love